If you're sitting somewhere in the United States right now, maybe watching this on your phone after work or listening on the way home, Venezuela can feel very far away. Another crisis, another headline, another country you'll never visit. But what is happening in Venezuela is not a distant story anymore. It is pulling in the White House, shaping your border policy, affecting prices at your gas station, and even influencing the security situation in U.S. cities. It's also pushing the United States into one of the most dangerous standoffs in the Western Hemisphere in decades. So let's walk through why an average American should care, not in abstract foreign policy language, but in terms of what this actually means for your life. Venezuela today is ruled by President Nicolás Maduro, who has been in power since 2013. Earlier this year, he was sworn in for a highly controversial third term after an election widely condemned by many democratic governments as fraudulent and unconstitutional. The opposition and many international observers say the real winner of the July 2025 vote was opposition candidate Edmundo González, backed by longtime opposition leader Maria Corina Machado. Instead, Maduro stayed in office, and the world split along familiar lines. Russia, China, Cuba, and a small group of allies recognized him. Much of the democratic world did not. Inside Venezuela, the consequences have been brutal. Years of economic collapse, hyperinflation, mismanagement, corruption, and repression have triggered one of the largest displacement crises on the planet. Nearly 7.8, 7.9 million Venezuelans have fled their country, a number comparable to the scale of displacement from Syria at the height of that war. And this is where the story starts to move directly into American life. First, migration. Millions of Venezuelans have scattered across Latin America, and hundreds of thousands more have made their way to the United States. As of early 2025, around 600,000 Venezuelans in the U.S. were estimated to be covered by temporary protected status, which shields them from deportation and allows them to work legally. Many others have tried to enter irregularly at the southern border. You've seen the images: families crossing the Darien Gap jungle, long lines at border crossings, tent cities in American towns that never imagined themselves as frontline migration hubs. This isn't just a border story, it's a Venezuelan story playing out on American soil. When the current U.S. administration under President Donald Trump sharply tightened asylum rules and shut down a key smartphone app that migrants used to apply, something unusual happened. Migration flows actually reversed. According to recent reporting supported by UN data, at least 14,000 migrants, many of them Venezuelans, turned back south after realizing the door to the United States was effectively closing. Some decided to return to Venezuela, even though the crisis there hasn't gone away. That means choices made in Caracas and in Washington are literally determining whether families end up in US shelters, on US streets, or back in a collapsing Venezuelan city. If you live in a border state, you feel this in your community services, your local politics, your school enrollment, your social safety net. If you live far from the border, you still feel it through national debates over immigration, the cost of emergency programs, and the way migration shapes elections. Second, security and drugs. Venezuela is not just a humanitarian tragedy, it has become a key hub in the regional drug trade, especially for cocaine headed north. For years, U.S. officials have accused Maduro and senior members of his government of supporting or tolerating drug trafficking networks that move huge quantities of narcotics toward the United States. These accusations have now escalated into something much more serious. The Trump administration has labeled certain Venezuelan-linked criminal groups as terrorist organizations and has dramatically increased sanctions and law enforcement pressure on the Tren de Aragua, a powerful gang that emerged from Venezuela's prison system and now operates across Latin America and, according to U.S. authorities, in U.S. cities as well. U.S. authorities recently announced new sanctions on people linked to the gang and raised the reward for one of its top leaders, who is on the FBI's 10 most wanted list for international cocaine trafficking. For an average American, this matters because the drugs trafficked through these networks don't stay in some distant Caribbean sea lane. They end up in US communities, in overdoses, in gang violence, in local drug markets. In response, the United States has launched a large military and law enforcement operation in the Caribbean. Over the past months, Washington has deployed additional warships, aircraft, and special forces to the region under what it calls a campaign against narco-terrorist cartels. US forces have carried out lethal strikes against boats suspected of drug smuggling, with reports of more than 20 such attacks since September as part of Operation Southern Spear. This is not a distant drone war in the Middle East. This is happening in the Caribbean, a short flight from Florida, in waters your Navy patrols, and under rules set by your government. The White House has linked these operations directly to Maduro. In recent comments, President Trump has accused him of running a narcotics enterprise at the highest levels of the Venezuelan state and has threatened to use force to stop it. At the same time, Maduro insists that Washington is using the drug issue as a smokescreen. He has accused the United States of trying to overthrow his government and seize Venezuela's enormous oil reserves. As one summary of his position puts it, Nicolás Maduro said the drug offensive is a pretext for orchestrating regime change and seizing Venezuelan oil. Whether you believe Trump, Maduro, or neither, the reality is simple. U.S. ships, planes, and personnel are now engaged in risky operations where a single miscalculation could trigger a much wider conflict. Third, the risk of war and what that means for Americans in uniform. The U.S. naval buildup in the Caribbean is no longer a symbolic show of force. Analysts note the scale, cost, and sophistication of the deployment, including aircraft carriers, amphibious ready groups, and advanced surveillance assets, and argue that it looks less like a short-term operation and more like pressure for potential internal upheaval in Venezuela. This comes on top of already tense relations. Maduro's controversial third-term inauguration earlier this year was boycotted by many democratic governments. The United States not only refused to recognize the result, it also placed a multi-million-dollar bounty on Maduro and some of his closest allies on drug trafficking charges. Now pair that with increasingly aggressive rhetoric and military activity, and you have a situation where US forces and Venezuelan forces are constantly testing each other. There have been reports of Venezuelan fighter jets flying dangerously close to US vessels, and Caracas routinely denounces US maneuvers as preparation for invasion. For an average American, that matters for a very concrete reason. If this escalates, it will be US service members, often young people from small towns across the country, who will bear the risk first. Any serious clash could lead to casualties, to hostage situations, to long-term deployments. That also raises big questions about international law and precedent. Legal experts are already warning that attacking Venezuela without clear UN authorization or imminent self-defense would rewrite the rules of international law and could open the door to similar actions by other powerful states elsewhere. In other words, what the United States chooses to do or not do in Venezuela doesn't just affect Venezuelans, it shapes the kind of world your children inherit. Fourth, energy and your wallet. Venezuela holds some of the largest proven oil reserves in the world. For decades, that oil flowed into global markets and indirectly helped keep fuel prices lower than they otherwise would be. Under sanctions, mismanagement, and collapsing infrastructure, Venezuelan oil output has plunged from its peak, but the reserves are still there. In moments of tight supply or conflict, Washington has quietly explored ways to allow limited Venezuelan oil back into world markets to keep prices down while still maintaining political pressure on Maduro. Now, with tensions again near breaking point and the threat of conflict hanging over key shipping routes, markets are watching closely. Every time there's a hint of escalation, another threat from Washington or another defiant speech from Caracas, traders factor that into expectations about global oil supply. You feel that at the pump? A prolonged confrontation, new sanctions on Venezuelan crude, or a regional crisis that spills into neighboring countries could all add volatility to oil prices. That hits not just gasoline, but shipping costs, food prices, airline tickets, in other words, your household budget. So when you see headlines about US-Venezuela tensions and operations in the Caribbean, it's not just a diplomatic story. It is linked to what you pay every time you fill up your car. Fifth, democracy and human rights and what they say about American values. Inside Venezuela, the human rights picture continues to worsen. International organizations and UN investigators have documented extrajudicial killings, torture, forced disappearances, and a justice system that increasingly serves the government's political interests rather than the law. In recent days, the death of opposition leader Alfredo Diaz in prison has sparked new outrage. Diaz, a former governor who was arrested after the disputed election, reportedly died of a heart attack in custody. Rights groups say he is at least the sixth opposition figure to die in prison since late 2024. A U.S. statement responding to his death didn't mince words. A senior U.S. official said this is yet another reminder of the vile nature of President Nicolás Maduro's regime. For Venezuelans, this is about survival and justice. For Americans, it raises a deeper question. How should the United States respond when a government in its own hemisphere is accused of these kinds of abuses? Some argue that Washington has a moral obligation to do everything short of full-scale war to pressure Maduro, sanctions, diplomatic isolation, support for the opposition, and targeted legal cases. Others warn that broad sanctions often end up hurting ordinary people more than leaders and can push countries closer to rival powers like Russia or China. There is also a hard lesson from history. When the United States has used military force or covert operations in Latin America, it has often produced decades-long resentment and instability that later spill back toward the US, in the form of migration, anti-American sentiment, and new security threats. So the choices your government makes toward Venezuela are a test of how America balances its values: human rights, democracy, the rule of law, with its strategic interests and its reluctance to get dragged into another conflict. Sixth, the humanitarian emergency and the cost of looking away. Organizations like UNHCR, UNICEF, and others describe Venezuela as one of the world's most underfunded humanitarian crises. Millions of children and adults inside the country struggle with access to food, clean water, electricity, healthcare, and education. UNICEF estimated it needed around $183 million in 2025 just to meet urgent needs for about 3.3 million people, including 1.8 million children. That doesn't even cover the millions who have left the country and now depend on strained services in Colombia, Brazil, Peru, and elsewhere. When the international community doesn't fully fund these appeals, the consequences are predictable. More people are forced to move in search of survival. That means more Venezuelans on the road, more pressure on neighboring countries, and ultimately more ending up at the US border. For an average American taxpayer, there is a simple equation here. The choice is not between paying for Venezuela and paying nothing. The choice is between investing in humanitarian aid and regional stability early on, or paying much more later in emergency border responses, crisis deployments, and long-term integration costs. In that sense, a dollar spent helping stabilize communities in and around Venezuela can be a form of preventive security spending for the United States itself. Finally, precedent. What happens in Venezuela will be watched carefully by other leaders around the world. If Maduro is able to hold onto power after a widely disputed election, crush the opposition, weather sanctions, and outlast international pressure, it becomes a case study in how to survive as an authoritarian in the 21st century. Other leaders facing domestic opposition will take notes. On the other hand, if the United States and its allies decide to escalate to the point of military confrontation and do so without broad international support and clear legal authorization, that sets another precedent that a powerful country can use military force to change a regime it considers criminal or illegitimate, even without a direct attack on itself. If that becomes normal, it won't just be Washington that uses that logic. Other great powers, including ones hostile to the United States, could apply the same reasoning closer to America's allies or even its own borders. That's why international law experts warn that what Trump does or doesn't do with Maduro could reshape norms far beyond the Caribbean. So why should an average American care about what's happening in Venezuela? Because it is already affecting the people who arrive at your borders and your bus stops. Because it is already tied to the drugs flooding your communities and the violence some neighborhoods face. Because it is already shaping the missions your military is sent to carry out and the risks your service members shoulder. Because it is already influencing the price you pay at the pump and at the grocery store. Because it is already testing what your country stands for when it talks about democracy, human rights, and the rule of law. And because the way this crisis is handled will echo in how other crises are handled for years and decades to come. In Caracas, in Washington, and out in the Caribbean, decisions are being made right now that will decide whether this becomes a slow burn stalemate, a negotiated transition, or a sudden, dangerous escalation. You may never go to Venezuela. You may never meet a Venezuelan. But the consequences of this crisis are already on your ballot, in your budget, in your news feed, and possibly one day in the lives of people you know.